We knew it was only a matter of time. The first community firmware for the Atari Gamestation Pro has been released over on Atari Age. And unlike the official firmware from My Arcade, which is typically focused on bug fixes and feature releases, this new custom firmware lays the groundwork for future enhancements, but immediately gives us the ability to add our own games to the GSP's graphical menu. So if you're ready to take your game expansion from looking like a boring laundry list to instead looking like this, I'm going to show you what you need to know right after this. This video supported in part by...
Playing VR, I tend to sweat. It gives me an edge. So King of Nerds happens to give me an edge too. Let King of Nerds give you the edge. Bye, King of Nerds.
Hey there, welcome back to GenXGrownUp. I'm John and I am a GenXGrownUp. Thanks for clicking on this video tutorial. This new community firmware, written and released by Atari Age member Brad from the 80s, is based off the official 1.30 firmware from My Arcade. Now, as I noted a second ago, there are no new features or cores added here, although this could certainly be done in the future. Instead, this release effectively migrates the operating directory of the GSP from the internal storage to your SD card. And once you have access to those files on the SD, you can start to tinker with the configuration of the menu and add your games right into the main interface and make them look pretty. Okay, I'll break this tutorial into two parts. First, how to get your Gamestation Pro on this new firmware, and then how to add your own games to the graphical menu. Let's start with getting this version on your GSP. Head over to the Atari Age thread linked down in the video description and download all the files provided by Brad from the 80s. Know that you need to be logged into Atari Age in order to get access to these file downloads. You may not need every file, but it's good to go ahead and grab them all for reference as you work. Now we're going to apply that new firmware. Now, I already produced a video on how to put firmware 1.30 on your GSP, so I'm going to refer you to that video linked down in the description for the step-by-step. The only difference here is that instead of selecting the My Arcade provided firmware file, you'll instead select the firmware-c.img file that we just got from Atari Age. Then, click the Run button and wait for it to finish. Once that's done, take your SD card to your computer and unpack the agsp.zip file to its own folder in the root of the card. This folder contains the custom scripts that will do all the heavy lifting to migrate the GSP's data to the card. Now throw the card back in your GSP and fire it up. Now this first boot might take a little while, up to a minute or so depending on your SD card's write speed, but just be patient. When it finishes, you won't notice anything different other than the firmware version listed on screen, but something cool has happened behind the scenes. Now power off your GSP and move the SD card back to your computer. You'll see this new data folder, which is where all the customization becomes possible. This is now the root operating directory for the GSP running under community firmware, and any changes you make here will be reflected in the graphical menu. Now you're ready to start integrating your own ROMs. Now, you can add any ROM to any section, though you can't create new sections. And how to handle every ROM type for every platform is beyond the scope of this video and would take hours to explain. So instead, what I'm going to do is walk you through how to add a single Atari 2600 game from start to finish. Now, as I do, I'll explain each value I edit so you can apply this knowledge to adding anything you want. In the case of my exercise here, I'm going to add the 2600 version of Berserk. Look, it's a bestseller, it's well reviewed, and as Berserk was acquired by Atari from Stern just recently, it most definitely belongs on the GSP. Essentially, for any ROM you want to add, look for a similar one that already exists and see what elements are present in the data folder already. For 2600 games, I've discovered that we need the ROM itself, and for simplicity, I'm going to rename it to berserk.a26. We also need supporting images. There's the box art, which needs to be sized to 236 by 322. That needs to be a PNG file and named the same as the ROM, so berserk.png. We'll also want a game screenshot. Now that needs to be a 362 by 278 JPEG and named like the ROM, so berserk.jpg. Finally, there's that banner image of the game logo. That's a 960 by 186 PNG with transparency and must be named like the ROM with underscore title at the end, so berserk_title.png. I found in my testing that the GSP will scale the images to the correct size, but not smoothly. So the closer you can get to the recommended dimensions, the better they're going to look for you on screen. Now, all these files need to be placed in the same folder within the data/games directory. I chose to put games I'm adding in their own folder, so I created Atari 2600_C for custom. Remember that path for the next step. Finally, we need to tell the GameStation Pro this game exists and where to find the files we just generated. Before I show you that, I'm going to take just a couple of seconds to remind you that if you're ever in the market for cool custom t-shirts or magnets or phone cases or other gifts with unique and nerdy designs, our merch store at GenXGrownUp.com/merch has it all. Games, TV shows, movies, sports, whatever you're a fan of, we've got something for you, and every purchase you make will go to support the next video, like this. All right, let's get back after it, and we need to look in that data folder and open up games.ini in the text editor of your choice. It's always a good idea to make a backup of this games.ini file before you edit it. Just in case you have a problem, you can always revert to the last working one. Take note of this first line, this update DB. We'll get back to that. As I noted before, though, we want to start with a game that's similar. So how about Asteroids? We'll find that Asteroids block. Here's the 2600 Asteroids. So I'm going to just copy that section all the way down from where it says Asteroids down to where it says vertical equals 0. Copy that, and then decide where you'd like to put this Asteroids. Now you can place it somewhere in the INI file alphabetically if you want. That's not required, so we're just going to place it right here on line 1314. I'll paste that in. Now I'm going to clean it up. I'm going to come up in the About section. I'm going to empty that About section. Just get rid of that. I'm going to come down to the Controls and empty that Controls section. Make sure I preserve the quotes on both ends of the field. So now we have this block of text inside of the games.ini file. It's the Asteroids that we copied. We just emptied out About and Controls, just cleaned that up. You might want to make a copy of that for later usage. And then we start editing it to make it work for Berserk. First and foremost, we changed the title inside of these braces. We know that our game was called Berserk, so that's got to match exactly the game ROM. Then you have the display name. This is exactly what will show up in the menu. So I'm going to call it Berserk. The suffix is the extension of the ROM itself. .A26 is what you want for Atari 2600. If you're working with something else, just match that there, whether it's A52 or NES or whatever. The release date is going to show up in the menu. Berserk was released for the 2600 on 1982. Now this player's field can contain either a 1 or a 2 or 1 or 2, which is the case for Berserk. Next we have class type. This tells the GSP in which menu to place Berserk, and since we copied it, it's going to be right. If you didn't copy a section, just refer to the document included with Brad's files. Next up is game type. This tells the GameStation Pro which core to use to run this game. 5 is the 2600, so you don't have to change it. If you didn't copy a block, refer to Brad's document to see which one. Hardware, we're not sure what that does. Leave it to 1, leave it to 0, whatever you want. Doesn't seem to do anything. Save appears to enable game saves, so save states. If you set that to 1, it will enable them. 0, it will not. Then we come down to timer. Now, this oddly named field is actually the path to where all the Berserk files are located. And since we placed ours in Atari 2600_C, I'm going to modify that. And finally, the About field is information that will appear in the left pane of the GSP's menu. In my case, I'll just put recently acquired by Atari. And then the Controls, this is information that will appear in the right pane of that menu. I'll just say, don't get shot. Great. Finally, you have that vertical field. The vertical field does nothing more than tell vertical arcade games to adjust their aspect ratio. Not applicable here for Berserk on the 2600, but if you wanted to, set it to 1, and it should try to adjust those to a vertical aspect. Finally, remember that first line of the file that I said to remember? If you make a change, you must change this update DB to 1 and then save the file. If you don't do that, the new firmware won't know to reindex this file looking for changes. And when it's done, it's going to set it back to 0. So every time you make a change, be sure you come and adjust this update DB back to 1. Now, save that file back onto your SD card, throw it back in your GSP, and let's fire it up and check out our handiwork. I got the SD card in my GameStation Pro. Let's jump into Atari games and go to 2600. What's this down here? Let's take a look at this newly installed Berserk. Now, there we go. So look, there is that title art, there's our screenshot, there's our box. The box is also featured here on the menu. Of course, here's the stuff we put in the left pane and the right pane, those two text fields, and let's fire it up. And we're playing Berserk for the 2600, something that wholeheartedly belongs on the GSP as an Atari game. Just wasn't available at the time that my arcade put together the software bundle. I've been having a lot of fun adding some of the most influential and notable games from the 2600 library that couldn't be included because of licensing right into my GameStation Pro menu. E.T. I got up here. I added this VCS version of Space Invaders. Look, I know we could play it from the SD card already, but now I can play it directly from the menu and it looks fantastic. I even threw that prototype sonar on here that was revealed just last year, or just discovered and dumped. And just having this here as part of Atari history, I think it's just really awesome. And in addition to adding your own games, you can also modify or remove the games that are pre-installed. So for example, it bugged me that Video Olympics was misbranded as Pong because Pong was kind of the name, was the most popular game. So I modified it. So now it's listed as Video Olympics and has Video Olympics art, not Pong. Now there are a couple of gotchas and limitations. I was able to add Kaboom into the menu and it shows as a paddle game. However, when you jump in the game, the paddle simply is not recognized right now. Look, I'm sure this is something that can be addressed. This is early in the life of this firmware, but you should know about it. I went ahead and added it because when it's fixed, I'll be ready. I also added a couple things to the bonus games, a couple arcade games, and just so you're aware when you go to add them, so I added like Donkey Kong and Donkey Kong Jr. here. And when you go and look at Junior, like you see, there's much less information to fill in. There's less stuff that you have to modify. So depending on how you want these to be displayed, you select where you want them to show up based on how you edit that game's INI file. And to show you just what's possible, I even added the arcade version of Berserk to the Atari Arcade section. Look at there, we have cabinet art, we have a screenshot, we have the marquee, and not only that, but I added in the artwork and samples, so look at my arcade Berserk. Let's throw in a coin and start. Samples are in there, all the speech. Yeah, why not go ahead and add the arcade version while we're at it? And the last couple things I'll mention is that if ever you want to go back to the stock GSP, just pull the SD card or delete those two new folders and it'll behave just like it always did. And even though we're on a new community firmware and we've edited the menu, we can still jump into the SD card file structure. And it still works just fine too. So really, under this new firmware, you've got the best of both worlds. You can browse the card like you always did, or you can head back to the main menu where you've modified your favorite games, and they're gonna look prettier than they ever did. Those are the steps to add your own new ROMs into the GSP menu under Community Firmware 1.30C. Repeat this process for each game you'd like to add, and you're set. Now there are slight variations based on platform. For example, arcade titles have a fourth image for the picture of the cabinet, but just as we've done in this video so far, start from a pre-installed working game and mimic the files and format of the INI, substituting your new game's materials. Really, that's it. But I know what some viewers are saying right now. They're like, John, that's a lot of work. Is there an easier way? And to that I say, yeah, it is a little bit of work, but there's not an easier way right now. Until now, this kind of modification was all but impossible, but now it is possible. It's important to remember that this isn't an official feature of the GameStation Pro, but something enabled by the Atari enthusiast community. In the future, could there be a pre-built pack, or a config tool, or a curated library of properly sized images? Sure there could, but that requires someone to do a lot of work. And whether you're waiting for an easier method or ready to forge ahead, I would encourage you to show your support for the very community that made this possible. Drop by the Atari Age thread and thank Brad from the 80s for his efforts. Offer your own findings to the discussion to help others, and if you're able, throw your coding skills into the ring to help improve and iterate on this process. Please let me know the results of your GSP menu customization down in the comments. And in the meantime, I will link more GameStation Pro coverage in the links here and here. I certainly hope you found something to enjoy in this video, and I cannot wait to talk to you again next time. Bye-bye.